Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of VNture podcast with your hosts, Taros and MR, as usual, for another great week of discussing visual novel elements. This week, we wanted to tackle one of MR's favorite topics in his VN's world building. The whole idea and structure of setting the table for what kind of environment and setting you're experiencing in a visual novel. Every story needs one, and so today we wanted to talk about some titles that especially interested ourselves in the topic of world building, and MR has one heck of a title to start with.
Oh yeah, I'm not done yet with talking about Baldur's Sky.
Nice.
So, a quick recap. What is Baldur's Sky? Is a story set out in cyberpunkish world in which you go through the events through the lenses of a protagonist with amnesia, which sounds like a generic setup. But the thing is, in this particular story, the proliferation of AI, virtual world, and its influence on a brain is quite a hot topic, with the big danger of what if you could suffer some brain damage and could lose some memories. And that's how you start up, you don't know what's happening, and you slowly regain memories. To establish such a world, I can't stress enough how important it is to introduce some words and terminologies, yet not overwhelm the user outright, because you would be so lost.
Mm-hmm. I remember Final Fantasy XIII just dropped you right into the middle of the story when it started. And just like you said, it used terminology and phrases that the reader was not expected to know at the time to really get you into the whole world-building immersion. But I hear for a lot of people it had the opposite effect, where they just had no clue what was going on.
I mean, I think it will always be troubling. There will be some people who enjoy that kind of detective work, I would say, because some will like the fact that you have a concept or a definition you don't understand, but people around you do. So you see that disconnect. And now your role as a reader is to note that down, listen intently to look for the explanation, and then recontextualize everything that happened once you understand. But how they did here, because unlike the traditional RPGs and your example, since VNs tend to have multiple endings and before that multiple routes, how they did it is a reverse ladder structure. And I spoke a little bit briefly about that before, but how that translates to is because you lack critical information, you do choices based on that, and your situation develops given your lack of information. But then, after finishing a route, both you as a player understand more, and the game unlocks a new route, because this one is not only a reverse ladder, but also forced route order. And funnily enough, the ladder every single time happens earlier. So it gives you an ability to branch off based how fast you understand the concepts you are entangled with. So the quicker you gather the memories and piece together the sequence of events and necessary knowledge, the faster you can switch routes and explore the new ones. So that was very interesting how they did it, because you play the first one blind, with the least amount of memories, the least amount of events, the least amount of comprehension to what's going on. You learn those basic concepts, and then you can unlock a new route in which you can use those concepts to branch off into something new. I really like that structure.
Oh, wow. Yeah, especially because it kind of mirrors how anyone would react in a position where they have amnesia and they've forgotten all this stuff. I guess the first run through, you're missing a lot of the info, so the game has to spoon feed you a lot. But then you play it again and you know this stuff and you can jump right into taking action a different way, right?
Exactly. Specifically, since you jump into shoes of a protagonist that has a mission he wants to accomplish, but you don't know what that mission is. So
oh, no.
You're stumbling through the first route, not knowing what are you doing even, where are you, at which point, where to go. But next time around, given that you have that critical knowledge, you can splinter off earlier because you know that thing. You as a reader, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And the story acquiesces by saying, "Oh yeah, protagonist remembered that concept that time," and branches off based upon those. That knowledge and that consequence of that other choice. Again, I'm trying as hard as possible to avoid any and all spoilers I can.
Okay. Well, how about this? On a different topic, how do you think Baldur's Sky handles its world building? I know you mentioned there's the whole amnesia thing, but it's also a very interesting world where it's full of mechas that, do battle and crazy hand-to-hand combat. And you mentioned it's a futuristic, cyberpunk sort of world. How does the world building come into play there?
They really had to sell the concept of ever-present AI network that surpasses what we even think about the internet. Something that is truly 24/7 and in many aspects almost inseparable with real life. And they do it with a load of concepts, such as AI avatars and representation of the net, how your cyber persona is linked to your brain and you cannot detach one from the other, how the avatars, how your presence in the AI cannot be ever fabricated, your genuine article. You can choose your avatar and your looks to some degree, but you cannot fake yourself there. You cannot create an empty vessel of sorts. So they quickly establish the rules in which society works, and especially the division that became from the people who were born with the new internet and those who were before that era truly began. Because this mirrors even our current situation. People from older generation that matured before the internet was widespread developed entirely different from those generations that grew up with the internet and vast access to knowledge.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it really does become a part of normal daily life, huh?
Yeah, and for those next gens, it's something taken for granted and something natural. And for those earlier people, it's something blasphemous, heretic in some ways even.
Mm-hmm.
Something that fakes reality. So it's, although I give you one more thing, it's an inspiration for this specific topic, and what made me think up, okay, Taurus, I want to talk about it. Because I think what cemented a good world building for me in that title is how they understood that there is a concept of a new reality, let's call it, virtual reality. Okay, so first thing that happened is the knowledge. Because just like an internet, that was a place to spread knowledge and information. But then it got weaponized. Hence the mechs that we see on the screenshots. Somehow you could make battles on it. And now that you know that there is a feedback loop between the brain, so your avatar that exists there, you could make a harm physical entity by harming the avatar. Okay? So then what happened is they established some task forces that exists both in reality and in virtual space. As a consequence, there are better and worse pilots of those mechs. And obviously the better ones were called aces. Probably like in the regular military and squads, you have some better and worse combatants. And finally, colloquially, those people got the name of hot doggers. And it's like, yeah, that's the natural consequence. Some people will find some cutesy name for some concept that is exclusive in this world. And I was like, dang, that sounds so natural.
Yep, it's the little things that really make up world building, huh? Yeah.
Exactly. Like you can throw all the words you want, all the concept, terminology, definitions, but if you dehumanize them, it doesn't really click. But you understand that if someone is so good at fighting in mecha suit, they become a street legend. Obviously, there will be some terminology that isn't like official, and it has some suburban vibe to it, and hence the hot dogger.
Yep, you get all sorts of niche hobby interests that take up their own interesting language and slang.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah. A lot of what you said about Baldur's Sky was really clicking in my brain, because there was another title I wanted to talk about that's really hitting a lot of the same notes. Specifically, it's called I.O. And it's set in a futuristic world that revolves around the advancement of cyberspace and the internet. And I.O. is pretty unique in that the story begins and you can choose between 4 main characters. And each of them are quite different. So depending on who you start with, you end up seeing a very different side of this whole world. In one case, like one of the protagonists is a high school boy who's not all that connected with the whole internet and all of that. So you're kind of looking at his life and the world around him from the outside in. And then you have like the protagonist of another route, who is the leader of a white hat hacking group. So like the good guys. And of course, they're super involved into the whole cybersecurity and networking and all of that stuff, and how the developments have changed over the many years into an entirely different beast. So you get kind of a hands-on approach to it. And so I really like that aspect of world building where you can see this one fictional, futuristic world through different lenses. Something else I really liked about I.O. is that some of the words that would display in the text would be hyperlinked. So it would be like blue and with the underline. And yeah, it'd have a tip system. So you could click on it and it would take you to like the in-game glossary or whatever, where it'd have a short paragraph going more into detail about it. Sometimes some of these terms would be like real world, hacking concepts or whatever. And sometimes, they would mark, okay, this stuff is fictional.
Did they make a distinction of what's in real life and what's in this fictional world, or
I don't think they did.
Blended?
I off the top of my head, I think it was blended. Some of the stuff was more obvious than others. Because I know you. Anyways, well, I'll let you talk about that later.
Because the first thing that came to my mind is Maitetsu. Maitetsu had that idea of a clickable links that redirected you to glossary that I really loved. And since I'm not that well versed in trains and how they work, I struggled to decipher which is real, which is not. The obvious ones, the concept of rail lords, so the small chibi androids. Oh, obvious. Okay, I get that. Sure, this doesn't exist in reality. And the concept of aircraft, so it was a general technology of personal aircraft, so an equivalent to a car, but for aircraft. And that was the technology that made trains obsolete. Because imagine if anybody has a personal aircraft, trains just don't serve a purpose anymore.
Right.
So obviously those two technology immediately scream to me, okay, those are fictional. Mm-hmm. But then they go in depth.
No, yeah, exactly. Because I always like tip systems because you can always check out the glossary and you can always read more into it. Or you could just skip it over if you really wanted to, because that's the whole idea, is that this stuff is background information. And between the option of showing it to you and making you read it in the middle of the story versus not telling you, it's a great middle option where you could check it out if you want to and learn more about this, the world building that takes place in IO.
I mean, I remember to this day how many otaku subculture weird words I learned just from playing Steins Gate, which also featured tips, glossary style.
And like I mentioned, how there were 4 different protagonists. Because you could start with any of them, they had to get the basic. The VN had to get the basics out of the way, so you ended up seeing some repeated tips, as you went through each route. But obviously, they would all each have different tip entries that would show up too. Sometimes you would see stuff from the perspective of that high school kid who's kind of looking from the outside in, and other times you'd get the hardcore hacking terms and whatnot from the white hat
hackers.
So I think this was a really a great way to introduce readers into it.
I mean,
I really like the system.
It's always hard because I personally love those glossaries. I understand if they are done in a manner that is overwhelming. I understand the criticism that people need to spend the second half reading the dictionary before understanding the main game. I get that. I heard that quite a lot with the next title I'll bring, definitely. But I don't know. Something in me enjoys that deciphering concepts of, okay, how the tracks work and what's the difference between an electric train and a coal-based train, explaining tips. Let's go. Because maybe, just maybe, it will have an importance in a story. So, I don't know. It's just, I have yet to find, or from the titles I read in events, a tip system that I didn't like. So for now, I'm all for it.
Nice. Well, I'm gonna assume that a certain fighting game you like does not have a tip system, though, right?
A certain fighting game doesn't have a system. Yeah, because the next title I'm going to bring is BlazBlue, and it actually has a glossary.
It does.
It does have a glossary, but I'm not sure if it has a glossary from the first title, or maybe it does, and it's unlockable. It's weird, okay? By the third entry, they definitely have the big glossary of everything. By last title, definitely has, for sure. So, I think the first two might not have it. But again, don't quote me on that. The big bad one, the VN that started it all, one of my earliest and one of the most craziest when it comes to terminology. Where do I even unpack this one? First and foremost, just like with my example from Bard Sky, one thing that resonated with me is the same as I said there. So the idea, if you have a world police which is the case in BlazBlue. There is one organization that pretty much is a world police, governs all the cities, is ever present, and maintains and enforces law. Maintains order and enforces law. It is NOL, Novis Orbis Librarium, or mockingly just library, because obviously people are fed up and they will call them on a border of derogatory form. So just like we have policemen, you could call them dogs of libraries, for example.
Dogs of the government.
Yeah, exactly. But library was the derogatory form because it wasn't necessarily about books, but the knowledge they collected were preserved in grimoire. And those not necessarily took form of books, but people assumed they were, and that's how they referred to them. And there's so many of those terminologies that get deeper and deeper, or have synonyms, which is probably the craziest part. Even the titular BlazBlue, the Azure Grimoire, BlazBlue, or sometimes referred to the original codex, it's all the same. And now you, dear reader, have to decipher or understand whenever one of those three is mentioned, it's actually the one and the same. Until maybe it isn't, who knows? That's the mystery. Because what if on the surface is the same, what the populace understand is the same, but maybe it actually isn't. Oh god. It's convoluted, okay?
It's relatively rare for fighting games to really get all involved into the lore. So, in some cases, when you talk about the world building, does it have any interaction with the gameplay? Or, like you mentioned, is it mostly, I guess you could say, confined into the whole storyline chronologically and the glossaries and the timelines and whatnot? So I'm wondering how much interaction there is.
I first and foremost address the fact I brought this title, BlazBlue, genuinely considering this a visual novel. I did not bring it up as a fighting game with visual novel elements. So, since it has a dedicated story mode, VNDB also considers it a visual novel for probably the length and depth of its story mode. So first and foremost, I wanted to clear up that. Now to answer your question, the feedback loop of what's in lore and story affects the gameplay. The core concept of BlazBlue in its gameplay is how unique drives are. And there's an entire thing about those drives, the manifestation of souls, and the representation of those characters, how they represent the possibilities and dreams. In the gameplay terms, that means every single character has a unique button that manifests their drive, and in story that means the chosen people's souls resonate with what they want to achieve, and that manifests as a drive. Oh, that was convoluted again, I know. This game is crazy. Even the titles are something worth deciphering because they include concepts, the world in which the story takes place. So for me, every single game was, okay, this game is Calamity Trigger. Okay. So, what is Calamity Trigger? And hopefully, by the end of the game, I figured it out.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
It's not a guarantee.
It's not a guarantee, and it's not easy. But if you are attentive listener, you will figure it out. But yeah, it is convoluted. Even the idea of magic and science is just very obfuscated in that title. Because what? If you don't understand something, you tend to treat it as a trick or a magic, something that is unexplainable. But later down the line, if it's explained by the principles of science in that word, then it stops being magic. It becomes scientific. But what if, going further, you understand that under the basis of that technology, there's magic also. So it keeps fluctuating. That the technology that you thought was magic is actually a replica of a real magic that could achieve those things without using basically what's electricity in this world.
Very interesting. That's I like how you just mentioned magic, because there is one title that I wanted to talk about that has that interesting interplay between magic and reality. Surprisingly, it is Nurse Love Addiction. It's a super cutesy Yuri VN. I love the art style, and it's about the main character enrolling in nursing school, except she's still a real airhead. And so more often than not, she's out of her depth. And it's fun. And it's fun reading along with the ride and seeing where she goes with it. But specifically, I wanted to talk about this VN's relation with world building, because there's something that all authors should know, is that readers will generally assume that if you have something that seems to take place in the present day, that it's going to be a normal, realistic story. And on the face of it, that's what you would think from Nurse Love Addiction. It's about a normal young lady trying to forge her career in a new and difficult school life. So if you're going to add any changes into that setting, you really should make an example of it early so that you can set the reader's expectations accordingly. And the biggest one is that the main character's little sister seems to have something called a healing touch, where she can seem to make people's pain go away with just a touch. And this sister uses it all the time to get rid of her headaches, which is a pretty hilarious normal use for something this groundbreaking that no one can explain. It also sets the tone pretty well. But anyways, so in this case, it gets mentioned that this seems almost supernatural. So even though this seems to take place in a normal setting, and the story is usually about normal high school antics, it still reminds the reader that there's more to the story going on than meets the eye. There's been some, works of fiction that I've seen that really waited until like the midpoint or so on to start teasing these sorts of, supernatural elements or mystical stuff. And it hasn't always been well received by the audience, because you're kind of dropping unexpected genre twists on them. When you've left the reader, stew all these hours later, enjoying the plot and getting really familiar with it, now's not the time to start dropping new hints about other stuff going on, It should be done at the beginning. And that's something Nurse Love Addiction does pretty well. The hints of the supernatural stuff at the beginning, one of the characters having, strange conversations on the phone that the MC picks up that might hint at something else greater going behind the scenes. Even though the focus on this visual novel is still the, normal, daily high school life of this girl trying to forge her way through a career, there's still an element of mystery and magic in the background. And I like how you mentioned that with BlazBlue, because that's more of the, I guess you could say, hard science fiction look at it, where you're really investigating the causes and thinking about the real world consequences of it.
Yeah.
Whereas in this case, it's more on the softer side where it exists and no one really questions it. Well, at first, anyways. And you just kind of accept it and you focus more on how this changes up the story and the relationships. So I felt that, it was a really good comparison and contrast between something like BlazBlue's story and Nurse Love Addiction's story.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question, because when it comes to those genre switches, I think, oh my god, I think I named it, oh god, it was a long time ago when I spoke about it in context of BlazBlue. I think I coined the term sci-fi turn fantasy, and the reverse fantasy turn sci-fi. So when you think about magic, but it's explained by science, and the reverse, when you think it's science, but it's actually explained by science, by magic, right? So henceforth, genre X, turn Y.
Science fiction and fantasy are a lot closer than many people think, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it just so happens that if you introduce one thing to explain the other, you can swap the genre, which some people probably don't appreciate, because maybe they expected one thing, they don't like twists, and probably the later the twists are, the more Deus ex machina it feels, right? So my question was, how far in was it, the revelation? Because I know that you set the stage and set the tone, saying it's early on said that, right? But still, the reader could have an expectation, maybe it's a Chinese medicine or acupuncture that helps.
Yeah, maybe. And I guess that's also part of sticking the landing, where you want to give an ending that's in line with everything the readers provided earlier. Usually you see, it's mystery stories, where you don't want to pull new evidence out of your butt out of the last minute.
Yes.
Exactly. People hate that. And on the same vein, for other stories, you don't want to be shifting up the genre at the last second either. And to be honest, that's what Nurse Love Addiction kind of does in its last quarter or so. It starts getting a little too hyper serious and dramatic and takes a few liberties with what's going on. And I'm like, I just loved those, daily interactions with the main character's airhead personality and her classmates being all exasperated with her. And then it's like that all went out the window. Darn.
Yeah. Even within genre, a late revelation can mess up the finale. I have a problem whenever there is a supernatural setting, especially the one that tries to sell itself on witness, like Fate. Fate liked the idea that you have the concept of servants. They have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, and whoever is more cunning and can outmaneuver the others can win. I really like that idea. But if you give the same setting and then introduce something that is, I have the power on atomic level deconstruction of it's like there's some powers that there is no going back once you establish that there exists something like that.
No. It's funny that you mentioned Fate too, because that's another example where very quickly it establishes that its rules are meant to be broken.
Yeah, true.
You got the famed Lancers, Gaybolg, that it's a guaranteed strike through the heart and it kills everyone it hits, and then he hits Saber with it and it doesn't hit her heart. She just dodges it. It's like, what the hell?
Oh,
in a way, I guess Fate told you what to expect, huh?
True.
Anyways, yeah, so that's all I wanted to say about Nurse Love Addiction. I still very much enjoyed it, and I thought it was in hindsight, it was very informative of them, how they structured their events, so that you know what to expect.
Nice. And I think, on that note, we brought this episode to a close. Thanks everybody listening, and see you next week.